Before we get too deep into the hair system node attributes, we want to just make sure that our viewport performance is optimized. And basically, we want to make sure that we're getting more or less real-time performance, even if we've got a heavy hair system. And we can do that by adjusting the hair system's display quality. If I play this back now, with just the default settings, I'm getting about 24 frames per second. Rewind back to frame 1. I'll select the hair and open the attribute editor, Control A, and go to the hair system shape node. And you'll see right up at the top, display quality, and that's currently set to 100%. If I reduce that, we will simply see fewer wires. The default display for the Maya N-Hair system is as wires, not as a mesh. And this attribute will reduce the number of wires. Let's say, for example, we wanted more hairs overall, and that can be controlled from this attribute here, hairs per clump. Let's say I turn that up to a very high value of 100 hairs per clump, which means the hair is going to be extremely thick and it will render as such. I'll deselect and play it back, and you'll see we're getting less than 10 frames per second now. I'm getting about 6 frames per second. Rewind, select it, and reduce the display quality down to, let's say, a value of about 10% or so. And then deselect it and play it once again, and now we're back up to 24 frames per second. If I rendered this, I would actually see 100 hairs per clump, but having set that display quality down to a value of about 10%, I'm back to real-time performance in my viewports. And that's very important, especially when you're trying to test the dynamics of your hair system. There are a couple other attributes let's look at here. Set my hairs per clump back down to 10, and the display quality up to 100% once again. And you may need to actually sometimes rewind the simulation in order for it to update these attributes. As you saw just there, I changed the hairs per clump and it did not update until I rewound the simulation. So don't let that throw you off. That's a pretty common thing with Maya Dynamics. There's another display quality attribute that I want to show you, and that's in the PFX hair shape node. Let's select that tab, and you'll see there is a display quality attribute here. And at first, if you adjust this, you'll see nothing happen. This attribute only affects the display quality if you're drawing the hair as a mesh. You'll have to turn this switch on, draw as mesh. And we'll need to get in really close for you to really see that. So the difference between drawing as a mesh versus drawing as wireframe can be seen only when we get in close enough to see individual hairs. If draw as mesh is on, then the display quality in the PFX hair node will take effect. So I can set draw as mesh on and then reduce the display quality here. And I might need to rewind once again, but essentially now we've got a better performance. If I bring this back up again, we'll have more polygons on that mesh. And if I bring it down, we'll have fewer polygons. And if I bring it all the way down to 0, it's going to actually just default back to wireframe mode. I don't usually use draw as mesh. I would recommend that you have that turned off and the display quality in this node set up to 100%, and control the display quality from the hair system shape node. A couple other things we want to look at while we're here. We've got subsegments. And this is an important attribute. Remember when we first initially created the hair, we set the number of points per hair, and that's the number of CVs or control vertices along the length of each hair curve. Subsegments determines how many subdivisions we want within that. And if we bring this value up, we will get a smoother, better curvature to the hair at the expense of both viewport performance and render time. It's easiest to see, of course, when the hair is actually laying flat or curved. If it's out straight like this, we won't see the difference. So let's play the simulation and then stop it. And if we get in really close here, we can see that, in fact, there's some obvious linear segmentation. If we increase the number of subsegments up to 1 or 2, we can see it starting to smooth out. Good values for subsegments usually range between about 3 and 5. Anything beyond that's not going to help very much unless you're in extreme ultra close-up. And of course, the higher the number of subsegments, the slower it will calculate, both in the viewport and in rendering. Once again, I would set that up to somewhere between 2 or 3 to a maximum of maybe 5. One thing you might want to know is that if the subsegments is turned up very high and you have a lot of hairs per clump, you will exceed the maximum number of subsegments. And what will happen is that you will actually start losing hairs. They'll start disappearing and you'll get kind of bald spots. That's not a real issue. It's just something you need to know about. And if you have subsegments up beyond a certain threshold, you will see hair starting to disappear. Those are the most significant variables to think about when you're setting the quality of your hair rendering. You've got the number of hairs per clump, the number of subsegments, and then, of course, the display quality controls the viewport performance.